Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry about the delays, or if by reading this article I sound like Vader. Welcome to another episode of Spilling Tea. I'm your host, Tiffany Daniels. We're going back to that horrible world known as the JRC, but before we do the disclaimers, and folks, that pizza, it be calling me. It's calling my name, so we're going to just shoot straight through it, get these last two videos done, alright? In the description box, you're going to find a link to the article that the Judge Rotenberg Educational Center doesn't want you to read. It's written by NeuroClastic, a small non-for-profit started by autistics for autistics, wherein they interviewed and surveyed over 900 ABA professionals regards to the JRC's so-called behavior modification program. Matter of fact, the JRC doesn't want you to read this article so much, they've threatened NeuroClastic with a defamation lawsuit if they did not remove it from the website. Well, folks, NeuroClastic has refused, so you know the drill. Please read that article and share it on all your social media. Also included in there is NeuroClastic's public statement in regards to the defamation lawsuit threat, as well as a link to their GoFundMe. We are crowdfunding, folks, in case the JRC actually sees through with their threat. Also included in there, the Ozarks' first article in regards to the Agape boarding school, now known as Stone for Help boarding school situation, a so-called Christian-themed boarding school based out of Stockton, Missouri that takes in so-called troubled male teens that has impending over 21 civil lawsuits, claims, and allegations leveled against it, all which have been substantiated by the Missouri Department of Social Services, and they include the following: sodomy, rape, sexual assault, child abuse, psychological and emotional abuse, child trafficking, starvation, and that's just for starters. You have one former staff member arrested by the FBI, another a doctor still on the premises with full access to the boys up on multiple, again, substantiated claims of sodomy, rape, and sexual assault of the boys there. You have an attorney general too obsessed with drag queens and trying and failing to defund public libraries to actually do his job. And you got a governor. What can I say about our governor? Send help. Please read that article. Share it on all your social media. We have the other pertinent links to the Stop the Shocks campaign as well, as always, including the link to this article, Autistica Hoya's massive archive on the subject, Jennifer Masumba's behavioral sheet of shockable offenses, a clip out of the 7-hour ordeal undergone by Andre McCollins back in 2002, and the ever-present self-explanatory Change.org Shut the Judge Rotenberg Center Down petition. When we discuss the JRC, you're going to hear vivid descriptions of and catch clips of surveillance footage of people with disabilities being tortured and abused. If you got young children present, folks, please use your headphones, all right? Trigger warning, this channel is marked not for children for a reason. We use profanity and speak on dark subjects. If your child is 16 and younger and they are watching this, very obviously parental supervision is advised, all right? Now, we're going to read a written testimony that was done by Sean Niemeyer, who's also an attorney, who has faced the JRC at least a couple of times now and is currently the lead attorney on the Sarah Villa case. And this was written a few years ago, back 2015. If anyone knows this case, inside, outside, sideways, it's him and Lydia Brown. And I mean, there's no contenders. I don't know as much as they know. Let's get into it, shall we? Trigger warning, torture, aversive behavior modification. Remember, this is 2015, so when you hear yesterday, we're not talking yesterday. Yesterday, the Massachusetts Joint Committee on Children, Families, and People with Disabilities held a hearing on 4 bills related to the use of aversive punitive behavior modification on people with disabilities. I and 5 other disability advocates attended and testified in support of the bills, particularly 3 of them which would ban or limit the use of Adversives, and a number of others submitted written testimony. My testimony is below. I'll be making a separate post about how you can submit written testimony later today, which we all did. Testimony before the Joint Committee on Children, Families, and People with Disabilities in support of House Bill 89S, 80, and S78. This is Shane talking, not me. I'm not an attorney. I am an attorney licensed in Massachusetts, New York, and Oregon who works in a field of disability rights advocacy. I am also an autistic person and a survivor of coercive treatment. I am writing to urge the Massachusetts legislature to pass House Bill 89 and S 80, which would ban the use of behavior modification procedures Adversives. Alternatively, it should pass S 78, which would limit the use of Aversives in ways that would functionally ban their use. Passing one of these laws would effectively protect people with disabilities against harmful, ineffective, and outdated practices that cannot be properly referred to as treatment. Thank you! Way outdated. Way. Like Mingala outdated. Adversives are harmful to people with disabilities. Adversives attempt to modify target behaviors through the use of punishments that cause physical pain or discomfort. This by itself raises significant ethics and human rights concerns, especially in the light of the fact that these interventions are used primarily on populations whose members have no legal right to refuse treatment and are rarely, if ever, given the opportunity to do so. Thank you. That whole consent crap that the JRC tries to use is crock. First, they'll say, but we get consent. Parental consent. We all know, we live in reality, that not as much as we would like to believe, not every parent has their child's best interests at heart. We know that. But let's go into it here. We know of at least two parents. The parents of Sarah Villa and Cheryl McCollins, the mother of Andre McCollins' mother, as well as Antwone's mother, who point blank refused Adversives. Point blank. Made it clear. Right there in the black and white inside their IEPs, no less. What the JRC does when a parent protests is they go above their heads and get permission from the Massachusetts courts, which we all know they've had wrapped around their fingers since the 80s. The whole idea that consent is happening is a lie. Not a single person that has been stuck in that hellhole consented. They do not have the ability to be able to say no. Many because they start as minors. But let's read into this, shall we? The United Nations has condemned the use of adversives as a form of torture and the violation of international human rights law. In practice, reliance on the use of adversives in addressing behavior has repeatedly resulted in physical injury, lasting psychological trauma, and death. In one instance, a young woman at the Judge Rotenberg Center in Canton, Massachusetts, named Linda Cornelison, died from untreated stomach ulcer. JRC staff treated her reaction to her symptoms as misbehavior and responded by punishing her with 61 adversives on the day she died, including pinching, spanking, and forced inhalation of ammonia. God. That should have got them closed down alone. That should have got them closed down a long time ago. The Massachusetts Department of Mental Retardation, which is the term from the time, I do not like the term, described JRC's treatment of Cornelison as being inhumane beyond all reason. The more common harmful effects are no more acceptable for being less extreme. For instance, aversive devices currently used to electrically shock people as a form of punishment routinely cause first-degree burns. Slightly read my ass. The use of adversives has also resulted in lasting psychological harm, including symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, learned helplessness, maladaptive interpersonal skills. They know this because Lydia and Shane, they deal with the victims directly. One survivor of conditioned skin electric shock testified before the Food and Drug Administration's Neurological Devices Advisory Committee that it had instilled a lesson in me that it is okay to hurt me as long as they are trying to correct me. Thank you! There is no evidence that supports the use of adversives as an effective intervention. The Judge Rotenberg Center is the only facility in Massachusetts or the country that openly use adversives. JRC has been unable to produce peer-reviewed evidence that supports the use of adversives. Thank you. Not since the 80s, folks. No study in the past 40 years, again, has demonstrated their effectiveness. JRC conducted its own research on the use of Adversives, which it did not submit for peer review. Peer-reviewed, again, my ass. And which resulted in finding that Aversives were consistently effective in the long term. The fact that some people have spent years or decades of their lives receiving adversive interventions at JRC without permanent reduction in their self-injurious or aggressive behaviors supports this conclusion. There are effective, non-aversive interventions to address dangerous behavior. As knowledge about specific disabilities and their behavioral manifestations has increased over the past several decades, educational and treatment professionals have developed less restrictive and more effective forms of behavioral interventions. These interventions involve identifying possible reasons for why a person might be engaging in a certain behavior and developing interventions that address its underlying causes, which we've said how many times? Medical model is using logic. Scary, right? They also may be supplemented by other forms of treatment and accommodation, such as occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, and the use of alternative and augmentative communication devices. Again, this is something part of I spearheaded in the early 2000s when we helped get funding for the communication devices for our nonverbal counterparts. And I was a help of, getting those integrated as a part of the programs and plans with the case managers with the state. I also got to participate in several conferences where the new devices that were just newly and recently developed were being showcased. It was very cool, by the way. I do miss that. That was awesome. Moving on. Schools and treatments providers across the country make use of these methods on a daily basis in working with people with disabilities, including those with significant impairments and behavioral difficulties. We do. We do. I was doing it in the early 2000s. I know they're still doing it now. When correctly and consistently used, they can allow disabled people to gain skills and meaningfully participate in their communities. I know because I helped facilitate the change. State legislative action is necessary in light of the inaction of other government agencies. Despite the widespread recognition that aversives are harmful and ineffective, numerous government agencies in Massachusetts and other states and on a federal level have either unable or unwilling to fully prohibit their use. The Massachusetts Department of Developmental Services' efforts to do so have been hampered by a 30-year-old consent decree between the JRC and a now-defunct state agency that does not reflect current research or recent developments. The New York State Education Department has been similarly prevented from enforcing its regulatory standards for the use of aversives through litigation. Thank you. On a federal level, the Food and Drug Administration has not yet banned the use of aversive conditioning devices, despite the recommendation to do so by its advisory panel last year. Remember, this is 2015, folks. We got them banned. The DC Circuit took it away, and now we're having this conversation again. While these agencies struggle or refuse to take action, people with disabilities are still subject to use of harmful aversives. When I say I think about this as I sleep at night, that's because I do. Every day. For all the above reasons, I strongly support a total and functional ban on the use of aversives through the passage of House Bill 89 or Senate Bill 80 or S78. Thank you for your time and your concern. This lays it out, doesn't it? This gives the lie that JRC has been toting for years. Aversives are the only thing that help. If that were true, they would be implemented throughout all 50 states, not designated to one center. To try and make me believe that this is the only place that they get the worst of the worst doesn't work numbers-wise. Particularly to me who've worked this field. I had a caseload, folks, to the skies. I covered 25% of my state. 25%. Do you know how many thousands of individuals that is? We're not just talking kids either. We're kids, adults, and elderly. Okay? To try and tell someone like me, who was over such a large region, my state, that I could never understand because the consumers that I dealt with were never as severe as the kids at the JRC. The math doesn't work, does it? And I've seen those alternative programs and therapies. And yes, medicine, assistive devices, therapy work over and over and over again. And folks, we got the data to back it up. Their arguments are void and should not be listened to by anyone. But we have federal court judges who are very, very much in their pocket. They're either drinking the Kool-Aid or they're getting paid. I don't know which one it is, but I'm going to assume that it's the latter. And yet, the media still refuses to touch it. At least not in a meaningful way. In 2012, they were forced. Because that video of Andre McCollins went viral. But since then, they seem to have disappeared. And a few publications that post an article here and there do so in a capacity that it is not readily available to the larger masses of this country. And I will continue to call them out. I will continue to call them out every time because they have dropped the ball on these kids. They want to sing about AH and her fake, insane accusations. But they're going to hang out real survivors and real people who are suffering right now out to dry. We should be asking questions as a society on that. I'm going to close out. We don't get very many views on this channel. The few that we do tend to get removed from time to time. So please don't forget to hit the like button, hit subscribe, and don't forget to hit the comments. I do appreciate your time. As always, we here at Spilling Tea hope you have a good one. We're going to do the last video here in just a moment. And then I'm going to Multiverse Madness and Pizza. And then attack the tiny Mew with, like, cuddles and tickles and stuff. Kitty. Bye-bye, everyone.